The road seemed endless, illuminated only by the headlights that pierced the darkness of the night. The roar of the motorcycle echoed like a cry of freedom, and each curve brought the feeling that nothing could stop that moment. But fate is treacherous. In a second, control was lost. The impact was brutal, and the body was hurled into the void. The silence after the crash was more terrifying than the accident itself, as if the world had stopped to watch the beginning of a dark journey. If you're looking for stories that reveal what lies beyond life, subscribe now and be part of this journey. If this narrative has already captivated you this far, leave a like to support the channel and show that you also believe there are mysteries beyond death. And lastly, share this video with someone who needs to hear that the end isn't always truly the end. Because sometimes it's just the beginning of something much deeper. The impact didn't knock him out. It was as if reality had been ripped in two and he had slipped through an invisible crack. First came the sound, a deep pulsating hum that seemed to vibrate within his bones. Then the light from the headlights dissolved into a gray veil, and the asphalt became an endless corridor. He tried to breathe more, but the air tasted of iron. An emptiness pulled him, silently insistent, like a tide that knows no return. The edges of the world dissolved and the fall began. It wasn't quick. It was endless. Time and space lost their names. He saw shadows writhing like broken memories, dark and soundless scenes from life. There was a repeated voiceless question. How much more can you take? Each second was a burden, and each beat of what remained of the heart was a hammer blow in the dark. Then, black, hingeless gates opened, suspended in a nothingness that seemed alive. The smell came like a blow-burnt old sulfur mixed with the scent of damp metal. A whisper traveled through the abyss, almost affectionate, almost familiar. Do you know why you're here? He had no answer, or perhaps he knew too much. He tried to turn his body, to grab onto something, but the world offered no walls. It was the emptiness itself that held him back. The corridor widened into an arena of shadows. Nothing had edges, nothing had a sky. And in the center, the certainty that the fall would not end. The shadows were bolder now. Some had shapes, others only intentions. He recognized one of them not by her face, but by the feeling. An old fear, the same one he had when he woke up years ago with the idea that something was watching him from the other side of the mirror. And now that presence had returned, smiling at him. The deep sound that accompanied him transformed into voices that weren't human words. They were negations like doors closing, and each negation pushed him further into his own consciousness, where the ground was made of guilt and flashes of choices. He wanted to ask for help, but the request got stuck, as if the abyss exacted a price for every intention. It was then that the cold arrived, not an ordinary cold, but a cold that thinks. He realized that the atmosphere there wasn't nature, it was will, a will contrary to life. And yet he still resisted, and a thought ignited. Not yet. That small, insolent spark prolonged his breath. The black gate began to close, and he was drawn to the center, where the darkness seemed solid. There, a faint line of light crept in from miles away, so faint it could be his imagination. But he fixed his gaze on it, not to escape, but to remember something the world had not erased. The tide of emptiness tried to drown out the light with louder whispers, promising rest without return, and he almost gave in. The deep sound began to pulse again, now rhythmic, like a distant call. And at the very edge of the fall, when night seemed to breathe for the first time, the abyss fell silent, not in victory, but in anticipation. Something was approaching, and it was something that even hell itself hesitated to name. The ground wasn't ground. It was a living skin of ashes that yielded and creaked with every step. The horizon curved inward as if the world itself were an open wound. The air had weight, and breathing felt like signing a pact. In silence, he realized he had arrived in a kingdom where hope was not banished, but mocked. The invisible walls whispered, and each whisper brought displaced memories, as if his own memories had been rewritten by hands that had never known light. Towers of rock rose at impossible angles, covered in marks that flickered like cold embers. There was no sky, only a vault of darkness that pulsed like a weary heart supporting a broken universe. In the distance, rivers of fire flowed silently, winding their way, guiding souls that were not souls. Some figures moved slowly, with a serenity that was more frightening than the scream. They seemed like shepherds of ruin, ringing soundless bells. He realized that their pain had rules, and with each step a thin voice measured his courage as if weighing gold. With each decision, the kingdom responded, bending shadows to align the landscape with fear. It was then that he saw the creatures, not brutal monstrosities but elegant forms of despair. Elongated bodies, blurred faces, eyes that were tiny eclipses. They came not to attack him but to see him. Observation was a blade, and he felt judged by a jury that knew everything he was trying to forget. In the center was a square made of dark glass that reflected what wasn't there. Stepping inside, she saw not what her face would be, but possibilities. In each reflection, a life she could have had, forgiven choices, cancelled guilts, embraces that never happened. This mirror whispered promises with a taste of condemnation. Stay, here no one demands that you be better. The invitation had the sweetness of renunciation. The cold approached like an animal and didn't bite, it surrounded him. Touching his skin, it brought with it a weight and the certainty that falling wasn't an accident, but a direction. He looked around and noticed pillars with erased names, marks of someone who had been there before. The kingdom seemed aware of his resilience, and therefore it tuned the strings of the scenery to seduce him with rest. A path made of dead light opened up, leading to what seemed like an altar. There, time bent, and he heard his own heart like a discordant instrument, trying to find a rhythm in hostile territory. On the altar, a silent flame trembled, not from the wind, but from meaning. The flame did not warm, but rather reminded of something greater than the kingdom, a word that the place could not bear. The flame diminished as he approached, and the creatures retreated with a respectful step, like guardians of a secret they preferred to see forgotten. He reached out and felt an impossible breeze, an echo of the world, and the kingdom trembled in anger. Towers lamented and the ground made the sound of ancient bones, desolation trying to survive the name that was born within him. It was then that the judgment took shape, not a verdict but a choice. To stay and forget or to remember and suffer, he chose to remember. The kingdom understood, the cold turned to calm hatred. The shadows closed the circle and the altar shone one last time, as if to say, "Be worthy of what comes," and the silence after the phrase was absolute. The instant the darkness raised its crown, a vibration cut through the square, piercing the ash like the first sound after the flood. It was not from this place, and the kingdom of desolation seemed to hesitate for the first time. Something was approaching, measuring the distance between ruin and rescue. Then the air stopped, the flame waited, and he, firm, decided not to kneel. The circle was closing in, and the creatures, once distant, now advanced with slow steps, as if savoring each instant of the agony. The air had become so thick it was impossible to breathe, and each attempt to catch a breath was like swallowing red-hot iron. The motorcyclist felt as if there was no ground beneath his feet, only an invisible prison that kept him suspended between torment and nothingness. The silence of the kingdom of desolation had been replaced by a chorus of dissonant voices, cries that came not from outside but from within him. They were distorted memories, magnified mistakes, guilt transformed into monsters. Every failure in life now had a face, and they all surrounded him, demanding payment. Despair wasn't just fear. It was the certainty that there was no way out. He tried to scream, but his voice was swallowed by the abyss itself. The shadows drew closer, and one of them extended a hand made of smoke and bones. Touching him didn't tear away any more hope, so the emptiness inside him grew, and for a moment he believed he was lost forever. His heart, which had once pounded with resistance, began to fail, as if giving up the fight. The cold turned to absolute ice, freezing even his thoughts. He couldn't remember who he was, or why he was fighting. He only knew that he was being consumed. It was at that moment that the climax of despair was revealed. The creatures raised their heads and, in unison, uttered a wordless sentence. The ground trembled, fire rose in columns, and the dark sky opened like a gigantic mouth. He was pulled to the center, where the darkness solidified, as if he were being swallowed by hell itself. Panic reached its peak. There was no more fighting, only surrender. He closed his eyes, awaiting the end, and in that gesture he realized that the greatest terror was not dying, but existing eternally in that place. But just when everything seemed finished, something different happened. Silence returned abruptly, as if hell itself had held its breath. The creatures retreated not by choice, but out of fear. A vibration swept through the space, gentle yet irresistible, as if a greater force were piercing the walls of desolation. He opened his eyes and saw in the distance a faint light, impossible to extinguish. It was small, yet enough to make the abyss hesitate. The despair that had been absolute until then was interrupted by a presence that did not belong there. And in the heart of the chaos, the first spark of hope was born. Darkness seemed to triumph, and all of hell awaited the moment when its soul would be swallowed up without return. The creatures, previously mere observers, advanced in circles, drawing ever closer, like predators savoring their prey before the final attack. The ground burned and the air scorched, and hearts no longer beat strongly enough to resist. It was the end, but it was in that instant, when despair reached its peak, that something impossible happened. A light tore through the abyss, and it was not fire, nor lightning, it was a presence. At first it seemed only a distant spark, fragile before the immensity of the darkness. But in seconds it grew, expanded until it became a flash that forced the shadows to retreat. The entire inferno fell silent, and the once arrogant creatures now bowed in panic, as if acknowledging an authority they could not defy. In the center of that light, a figure revealed itself, and there was no doubt. It was Jesus. His countenance was not merely human. It was divine, radiating a peace that contrasted sharply with the surrounding chaos. His eyes no longer judged. They penetrated to the depths of his soul, revealing everything that was hidden. The motorcyclist, still gripped by fear, felt something he hadn't felt since the beginning of the fall: hope. Jesus didn't need to raise his voice. A single gentle word echoed like thunder. "Enough!" And hell obeyed. The pillars of fire went out, the screams ceased, and the invisible chains that bound it shattered like glass. The creature's presence dissolved, unable to withstand the light. The motorcyclist was enveloped by a force that not only protected him, but restored him. He felt the warmth of the light pass through every part of him, healing wounds that were not physical, but spiritual. The fear vanished, replaced by an indescribable peace. It was as if he were being ripped from a nightmare and returned to the truth. The hell that once seemed eternal was now nothing more than a powerless shadow before the divine presence. At the height of the experience, the motorcyclist understood that he was not alone. Even in the darkest depths, there was an outstretched hand ready to rescue him. And that hand not only saved him, but brought him back to life. And the abyss no longer had power. The light had won. The body was motionless, but the soul still burned with the memory of the light. The motorcyclist felt pulled out of the abyss as if ripped from invisible chains. The fire, the screams, and the creatures dissolved into silence, and the darkness that had once seemed eternal was torn apart by an unstoppable force. Then, the fall ceased, and the void lost its hold. It was being returned. Suddenly a shock shot through his chest, and his heart, which had stopped, began to pound violently again, as if it were being hammered from within. Air rushed into his lungs in a desperate gasp, and his eyes snapped open to reality. The cold asphalt lay beneath his body, and all around him, human voices called his name. Frantic hands tried to pull him back. Sirens echoed in the distance, mingling with the sounds of life returning. But something inside him was different. It wasn't just survival, it was awareness. He knew he had crossed a line few know. Hell wasn't a metaphor or just a dream. He had been there and felt the weight of condemnation, the coldness of hopelessness, and the gaze of the creatures that fed on souls. And even more, he had felt the apparition that rescued him, the light that not only conquered the darkness, but showed that no darkness is absolute. While the paramedics worked, he remained silent, absorbing every detail. The sky above, once just empty space, now seemed like a testament. The simple act of breathing was a miracle. Each heartbeat was a reminder that life is not a matter of chance. And he didn't return by luck. He returned because someone brought him back. The return didn't erase the trauma, but it transformed it. And the road, the fall, the hell, the apparition, everything was etched into his memory like a spiritual scar. He knew he could never explain in words what he had seen. But he also knew he didn't need to convince anyone because the experience was his and its meaning was beyond human comprehension. Lying on the asphalt, gazing at the sky, he understood that life is a fragile thread held together by something greater than time. And that even when all seems lost, there is a force capable of crossing any abyss. A force that not only saves, but redefines what it means to exist. What you just heard is just one of many stories that reveal the mystery of what lies beyond life. If this experience touched you in any way, the first step is to subscribe to the channel now so you don't miss any of the upcoming stories that will take you even deeper into this universe of spirituality and near-death experiences. Next, leave a like. This strengthens our work and shows that you believe these stories deserve to be told. And don't forget to comment and share what you felt, thought, or even if you've experienced something similar, because your voice is part of this journey. Finally, if you know someone who is also searching for answers about what happens after everything seems to end, share this video with them. Here, each account is an open door to reflections that challenge logic and awaken faith. Keep exploring our channel, because I know there's still so much more to be revealed to you.